From AATH, the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor, this is Laughbox, the podcast for laughter and humor professionals. Here's your host, Chip Lutz.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Laughbox, the official podcast of the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. You know, on this podcast, I got to talk to people I know, people I've met, and today I got to talk to somebody I've met, I've heard speak, and who is incredibly an awesome human being, you know, all the way around. I get to talk to Dr. Gina Barreca. She's been on 2020, The Today Show, CNN, BBC. She's an author. She wrote, they used to call me Snow White, but I drifted. And, today, we're going to talk a little about her new book, If You Lean In, Will Men Just Look Down down Your Blouse, which as a man, that's probably true. Anyway, welcome, Gina, to Laughbox. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so delighted to be talking to you, Chip. It's a real honor. Thank you very much.
Well, the pleasure is absolutely mine. Now, I know, I've met you, I've been through all your website. I know a little bit about how things go with you. However, some of our listeners might not know you all that well. So if you could share with our listeners a little bit about, who you are, what you're about, what your gig is, that would be awesome.
Great. Well, I always start, when I talk to groups, I always start by telling them the basics, so that especially the women who are in the audience don't have to try to guess at any math. So, 50 years old. Women like to know, is she older than I am? Is she younger than I am? Because the way we're brought up in our society, it's one of the essential things. It's like, men just want to know if you're over 18. Women want to know, how old you are, so they can sort of, anybody who's too old for work study and who's too young for cremation is basically my age. I now, at 60, I'm pretty much, on everybody's age. And I weigh 153 pounds. So I'm absolutely, generic, later middle-aged, early-age lady. And I have a really good time in life. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, originally, which I think everybody who has ever been to New York for more than 3 hours can hear it in my voice, despite the fact that I've lived in Connecticut for 30 years. My day job is to teach English literature, Victorian literature, modern British literature, creative writing, feminist theory, at the University of Connecticut in Storrs, Connecticut, which is basically in the woods, which is really far from growing up, in Brooklyn, New York, and on Long Island. But I, moved from my husband and I live on a couple of acres out here in the woods. And my friends from New York and my brother, who still lives in Brooklyn, bring us food in a cooler from the city, like we live on Ice Station Zebra. Because we really still can't get good bagels or really good lox or anything like that. But, it's great. And I've been teaching. I write a column that's now syndicated, put out in Tribune newspapers. I write for the Hartford Courant, where it first appears every week, every Friday. And it's available on my website, which is ginabarreca.com. You're very kind to say you've been through it. And I do a lot of stuff about gender difference in humor. That's really my focus. And I think that's what I was talking about when you first heard me at the National Speakers Association.
Well, I think it's funny that you said that men just want to know you're over 18 and women just want to know how old you are if you're younger than they are. I think that's hilarious.
I think it's true.
It is true. Are you?
We have a very different attitude.
As a man, I'm like, are you 18? All right, good. Anyway.
Yeah.
That is really funny.
That's right.
Now, I have a theory.
Continue this conversation. Women are like, are you over a size 18? Yeah.
I have a theory on age. See, I'm a firm believer in telling people I'm older than I really am, simply because I want them to think I look really good for my age. Because if I tell them I'm 50, if I tell them I'm 55 and they're like, oh man, you look great for 55. And I'm like, yeah. But if I tell them I'm 45 and holy crap, you look like hell. What have you done? I mean, you've lived a hard life. I think there's, a big thing, a big disparity there. I'm like, it's like I would rather look better for an age that I'm not than look too old for age that I'm not. Does that make sense?
Well, it was interesting turning 60. I wrote about this recently because I went to and before I actually hit 60, the very young person behind the counter said, well, it's $2.25 with the senior discount or something. And I was about to say, I don't actually qualify. And I thought, who am I to tell her I don't qualify? She didn't ask me how old I am. She wants to give me the senior discount. I have gray hair. My hair is sort of streaked with gray, so that I'm a cross between Elvira, Queen of the Night, and Pepe Le Pew, and it depends on the day. And so she wants to give me the senior discount, and then I went outside, and a friend in the car, and she said, what do you mean you got the senior discount? You don't count. And I actually then called the Dunkin' Donuts headquarters and asked what counts, and they said it's up to the manager's discretion. So I thought, okay. They said in some places it's like 50. Some I think that they just felt bad for me that day. Maybe I went in, I was looking a little sad, I needed the coffee. But you go in looking old. There were some advantages to looking old, Chip. So you just go in and say, I'm actually 117, and I just put on, the good makeup today, and I'm wearing a highlighter, and I can, just please give me the senior discount. I mean, whatever it is. For me, we were fighting over whether I could get the senior discount, and I'm trying to think, why am I arguing to pay more money? What sense of vanity is forcing me to do this? But we were talking before we started recording this, about humor in everyday life, and I think you and I would both agree that the real humor in everyday life is what you find. It's not what you invent, but it's just making light, literally, letting the light into your life. It's what the people at the age know, that it's the found humor that's the real humor. It's the stories, not the jokes, that really make a difference in our lives. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I know that in your new book, you talked about how you've always been a storyteller. And then I love how you put it that, that in your family, they would say, you have to make everything a story. And then you put that just means you had a big mouth. But, I think stories, they're the bedrock of civilization. It's how we transmit everything.
That's right.
It's seriously, and it's how we transmit everything, norms, culture,
That's
everything.
right.
And if you can put everything in a story, that helps people understand things, and they can put themselves in that story. How did you start in the whole kind of storytelling business? Within the confines of that, within your family.
Well, thank you for asking. I really think that the first part of learning how to tell a story is to listen really carefully to what other people say. And the intriguing part of any story is always going to be in the details. It's going to be in the little tiny corners of the story. It's like looking at a really good painting or a fine piece of woodwork or eating a delicious meal. It's not only, the big flavors or the big colors. It's in the small, tiny brushwork and in the way the corners fit together. And so as a kid, I just listened to my immediate family, which like 117, and listen to the nuances of how one aunt would tell about what this one of her brothers did, but the other aunt would tell the story this way, and I would be comparing those two things and just like sitting under the kitchen table, and trying to sort of hide myself away, but being able to listen to everybody and looking at the patterns of the carpet under the table, and trying to remember as hard as I could. And then as soon as I could write, I started like just keeping little tiny notebooks. I think a lot of kids do. But I really kept mine carefully. I wrote down as much stuff as I could. And I don't think that meant I thought I was going to be a writer. I never thought I was going to be a writer. I always knew I was going to need to make a living. which still, I have a day job, as I said. The first thing when I have students who come in and say, I want to be a writer, and I said, that's great. How are you going to make your rent? What are you going to do to make a living? Figure that out, and then we could talk about what you want to write, because, Stephen King and 4 other people living as a writer. It's not something you do to put food on the table.
All right.
I think I'm hungry. I keep talking about food. And so seeing the stories. And then as I edited a collection called Don't Tell Mama, the Penguin Book of Italian-American Writing. And I wrote the introduction, and my brother wrote a rebuttal to my introduction, which when Publishers Weekly reviewed the book said, we've never seen this. We've never seen a family member rebut an introduction, by like a scholar.
That is
but
so
my
funny.
brother said, Gina talks about all these stories that Italian Americans. Yeah, but he said, she thinks of herself as part of a storytelling tradition, but we never told Gina or any of the women in the family anything. My brother believes that there is an entirely different storytelling tradition among men than there is among women, and that men's storytelling tradition is based on making stuff up to disguise the truth, and that women's storytelling tradition is based on discovering all of those little details that will uncover the actual truth that men have been spending all of that time trying to disguise. So I think it's a really, interesting sort of concept. But even, the critics who were looking at this book were like, this must be one heck of a family, because this isn't how this stuff usually works. So we always told stories. And I think that when you grow up poor and, there's a big family, there's a lot of storytelling that goes on. There's it's humor. I've made the argument, I think that humor, when you come from families that are pretty hard scrabble, you're going to hear a lot more laughter out of those neighborhoods than in the fancy neighborhoods.
I agree with that. Your brother sounds like my kind of guy. Because I completely understand where he's coming from.
Yeah.
I completely understand where he's coming from. But I'm going to certainly tell a story that's going to sound a lot better than it really is. In thinking about, like, I'm the youngest of 6 kids. I have 4 brothers, 1 sister, and her stories are a tad bit different than all of ours. Just a little bit different. So that completely makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So in looking at
mm-hmm. You would all be writing the rebuttal, right?
Yeah, I would be, absolutely. So how did humor become kind of I don't want to say a discipline for you, but was it just a naturally part of who you are, and an immersion of how you do things and how you write? Because certainly, you're one of the funniest people I've ever heard speak. You are hilarious, and your writing is hilarious as well. Is it just a part of your DNA of how you do things?
Well, again, that's very kind of you. Actually, it took me quite a while, I would say, until I was really in my early 30s. When I did the first book, they used to call me Snow White, but I drifted, which came out of all things, a very serious dissertation that I did for getting my PhD on anger and humor in women's novels in the 20th century. And that, I can tell you, that was not a funny book. It was a very scholarly book. And I didn't trust myself. I knew, again, just growing up in a family and in a neighborhood where if you weren't funny, somebody would smack you on the back of the head. But the idea was that, once I got to school, I felt like I had to take myself seriously, otherwise nobody else would take me seriously. And it took me sort of growing into my pause and becoming more confident, and that's what I try to encourage in my students and in the writers, whatever age they are, who are trying to sort of capture their senses of humor. It's like trying to, sometimes it's like trying to capture a butterfly inside a jam jar, like I said, these little bits of light, they sort of fly by, and it's tough, and because they take the light with them. But these brilliant moments, but sometimes they seem so frivolous. And what I remember sort of realizing is that just because something is frivolous doesn't mean it has to be trivial. Because it's not that somehow tragedy or sorrow are more important than laughter or joy. And somehow we've been taught culturally to believe that they are. That it's sort of, cheaper and easier to get a laugh. And I don't think that's true. I think in writing or on the stage or in a movie, I think it's easier to I will cry at toilet paper commercials if they're done right. I mean, if there's an ad, or God forbid, there's an ad from like the ASPCA or the Humane Society
with Sarah McLachlan
or something like that. I mean, I'm bursting with tears. I mean, yeah. I mean, we all know, those buttons are really easy to push. We can get sentimental immediately. And I think it's harder to make people laugh because you sort of have to do a little bit, unless you're just telling fart jokes. And I know there's a place for those, especially in the lives of men and boys. That's considered, like Aristophanes.
Well, I will tell you this. That is because, like, that is because humor, men are perpetually like 5 years old. That farts farts and anything doing with feces is always funny to us. It just is. Sorry. Right. I had to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, it's like your fontanelles have never closed.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, kid, your fontanelles have never closed. You are still somehow, it's just like, we have to be careful we don't drop you. It's just amazing. And, but yes, but for nothing wrong with that. But for women or for some men, it's a little bit different. And where you're not just, blowing raspberries, but you're trying to do something with words. But you have to do a little somersault to get a joke. Yeah. You have to know what the funny part is. You have to make a connection. And sometimes certainly I was intimidated. You're always afraid that if you tell a funny story, that somebody won't laugh. And I always say, if you take the risk and the sort of leadership. I know you talk about leadership. That's what you're known for. But you take a position of leadership and you tell what you know is a funny story, that if somebody doesn't laugh, what you haven't done is make a mistake. What you've done is to make a good beginning.
Right.
What you've done is to start a conversation where there can be something that has room for laughter in it. And that to say that you're taking something with humor doesn't mean you're not taking it seriously. It's not a contradiction. And some of the most interesting, funny books, if we go back to the great humorists that we think of, Mark Twain or Dorothy Parker or Robert Benchley or Dave Barry or Anita Luce or Nora Ephron. We look at these writers and we know that there are moments when they can get very serious, even in a funny story.
Right.
We'll be laughing, but then it's like they will come up with a line that's like a stiletto, and it'll go right to your heart because they're so good at what they do. And yet, again, that they won't let you fall, they'll hold you, but they make a real point. And I think that's a moment of fabulous creativity that I think everybody who wants to deal with humor is always trying to get to, use as a goal in terms of the way we deal with humor, to handle the most difficult situations with humor, and yet with compassion and with tenderness and with intelligence.
Right. And I think something you hit on there, that there is what makes things sometimes so funny when people lay it out there, is that there's so much truth in real humor. that, you know, that the more, how to put it, the more honest things are, the more people can identify with it, which makes it kind of universal, which, like, yeah, I've done that too. And then they see it in themselves and they can't help but laugh.
Yeah, well, it is, you know, when I do workshops or talk to groups and try, you know, when people are interested in finding their own senses of humor or using humor at work or in their daily lives or their writing. And it's all about, again, finding the most honest way to talk about what's happened.
Right.
And never to speak generically. Humor is never generic. It's always specific.
Right.
So that when in one of the essays in the new book, I talk about when my husband and I were driving across the country, and we stopped in a small town somewhere where we weren't expecting to stop. It was getting dark, and the weather was coming in, and we were on the West Coast, and so he said we should stop at this, you know, very small town, is sort of no name hotel, and there was like no cars in the parking lot. It was a Sunday night, and we thought, well, you know, maybe it's the off season, you know, we're not going to worry about this, and we stop, and you know, my job is to get things settled in the room, and he was going to go out and forage for food, you know, come back with something to take away. And so I'm going into the room, and it is the scariest room I've seen since the Bates Hotel. You know, there's like a shag orange rug that's been there since 1972, and twin beds covered with like shiny polyester paisley bedspreads, and an air conditioner that sounds like an aircraft carrier coming in that's not working properly. There's no closet. There's just like a little rack in a corner to hang some stuff on.
Nice.
No little cups. You know, usually there are plastic cups, right? No cups. Yeah. Not one cup anywhere. No glass, no plastic. And the pièce de résistance was there were clown prints, like the sad clown.
Oh my God.
Prints, but they were bolted to the wall. Okay. So that you know, former patrons had like taken them home, and you know, they weren't going to let that happen again. So they were bolted. You could go bolt. They were screwed to the wall. So I am sitting on the edge of this nylon twin bed, drinking wine out of the bottle, right? Because there were no glasses. My husband comes back to the room. He comes back to the room, and has a little bag. It doesn't look like there's a lot of food. We're both good eaters. And he says, well, the only thing I could get was potato salad. I said, what are you talking about? We were in the road for 8 hours. He said, well, there was only one deli. It was closing, and I didn't like the look of the meat. It's like, you got us 1 pound of potato salad to eat? And I said, that's it. And so we're sitting on the 2 twin beds, looking at the bozo prints, passing the bottle of wine back and forth between us, and he opens the potato salad, and I said, you get a knife and fork? You get us 2 forks? He said, I forgot. I said, what are we going to do? He said, and I swear to God, I can't make this up. He said, I have a shoehorn. So we are sitting in this motel eating potato salad with a shoehorn. I mean, and I thought, like, if I had seen a photograph of myself at like age 50, sitting in a dive motel, looking at a sad clown print, eating potato salad out of a plastic container with a shoehorn while drinking cheap wine out of a bottle, I would not have worked so hard in college. You know, I wouldn't have said, well, that's a future I'm looking forward to, you know. It's just really, that is not a snapshot I put on Facebook, okay? That's not one of those great memories. But that's what real life. And then when we left the next morning, you know, we left early. We didn't decide to lounge around the room. So we left, you know, at dawn. And we drove past these acres and acres of orchids. And I'd never seen orchids in a field. I mean, they were glorious. It was amazing. I think we were in Washington State or in Oregon. And I mean, it was just astonishing. And if we had kept driving at night to get to a better motel, we would never have seen that in the morning, you know? I mean, it was just like, life is a riot, but you have to look at it. You have to see what it hands you. Even when it hands you like the clown print, you have to figure there's going to be, like, down the road, there's going to be an orchid, you know? There's going to be something that makes up for it. And that's what makes the riot wild.
That is a great metaphor, that somewhere down the road, there's an orchid. That is awesome. And I love the fact that like,
I'm counting on it.
I think about some things in my life like that too. Like, if I had seen this 20 years ago, I never would have done this. Like, I see myself sitting in a crappy motel room, eating potato salad with a shoehorn, looking. That is, the picture I have in my head is absolutely hilarious. That is great stuff. That is awesome.
Well, but that's, and again, it's the idea. The idea of, you know, that being a funny story, because everybody's been in a situation. I doubt whether many people, I hope that not many other people have been forced to eat containers of food with a shoehorn. There may be some, but I think that everybody's been in a situation where you're thinking, man, I don't know how I got here, you know, but boy, this is not where, like, if my friends could see me now, this is the opposite of that. And so, but everybody's got a version. So when that story is in the book, and when it first came out as a column, I heard from so many people who were like, you know what happened to me? And they told their version of that story.
Right.
And it was great because, you know, so once again, it's like once you get started, people then feel free. You know, it sort of, it like undoes code or something. And everybody unlocks their cases and starts to take out their stories. And it's great. I mean, it just, you know, it's like confetti or something. Everybody's cheering and throwing up colored paper. It's really, you know, it's just a lot more fun when you make a funny story out of it, but it's in the details. And it's in, just as you said before, you know, earlier, it's in the honesty, and it's in, you know, telling the truth about life. And then other people will too.
Yeah, well, and the way you explain it, it kind of, it diffuses the tension and kind of reduces ego a little bit. You know, that story right there, like, if I'm thinking, like, you know, if I had never met you before, and I was like, I'm meeting Gina Barreca, and, you know, she's written all these books, she's, you know, up here, and then you share that story, it's like, hey, she's just like me. You know, I've had this as well. It reduces, it puts us on, almost on,
we're all the same.
Well, yeah, it does. Yeah, it puts us almost like on.
Well, we really do. I mean, we all have so much more in common, you know, than we do that what separates us. I mean, politics or ideologies or, you know, whatever, you know, the big issues are, especially in the world today, that it seems we're so eager to find out what divides us. One of the great things about humor is that if you're laughing with somebody, you're really close to that person. You know, for that moment, you're genuinely sharing something. And that's a real kind of intimacy, you know. That's better than the fake air kiss, you know. That's realer than a lot of shows of other kinds of you know, fake affection or, you know, sort of assumed sort of, you know, just the people show as affectation. I mean, that this is really, when you're really laughing, if you can really let go with somebody and really laugh, I mean, that's a connection between human beings that's really fundamental.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons that people understand why, you know, laughter, that the humor really is therapeutic, why humor is so important. And it's so essential in our lives. I mean, a day that we've laughed is a day we haven't wasted, even if we've done nothing else that day. But if you have laughed and you can make somebody else laugh, that's a day that you can count as one that's been spent, you know, put to good use.
Right. Oh, I agree with that. Absolutely. That there are a lot of days I might not do anything, but if I can make, you know, like every day I have 4 kids, I'll send them something funny just so I can lighten their moods a little bit, because I know that they're in their early 20s and they're taking stuff way too seriously. way too seriously, because
Yeah.
in 30 years they're going to be in a hotel room with orange shag carpet, eating potato salad out of shoehorn.
If they're lucky.
If they're lucky, yes.
If they're lucky. I have a good life. No, but it's true, and I think it does. We understand as we get older just how important humor really is, because humor is about perspective, and so it allows us to see things in from a different angle, and you could look at something. I won't go so far as to say 360 degrees, but you could see something maybe more in 3 dimensions or something. It's the world can seem so scary and black and white, and the horizon seems so bleak when I think, because you don't have anything to compare it to.
Right.
And then experiences in life start to repeat themselves. And we know that's one of the things that's funny. Fiction is funny. So, the first time you get your heart broken, you think, this is it. Life will never go on. All of time will stop, And then, if you get your heart broken again, God forbid, but you get your heart broken enough times, you're starting to sing country songs. It's why country music exists, is because there's repetition of these things, and you repeat something often enough, it becomes funny. Because you get perspective on it, because you realize that you're not unique, and it's not the only time this is going to happen. And you realize that there's, when you're, again, I work with, students, with young people all the time, and there's such a great fear of being humiliated when you're young, right? It's the thing that you're terrified of, that somebody's going to humiliate you. And I think as we get older, that we replace the fear of humiliation with an embrace of humility. It's a virtue. And we start to realize, as we were just saying before, how much like each other we are.
Right.
That we're not in our own individual universes, but boy, we're all in this together. And we better find a common cause, and we better, get together on this stuff. We better find out what we know and like about each other, and how we can pool our interests. And that there's a great relief in actually understanding that we have so much in common. But I think that that's something that's, that's part of getting older, part of growing up, certainly. And that embrace of humility is something that I think leads to a much more generous sense of the world. And the sense of generosity is what makes humor a lot easier to create, and a lot easier to enjoy, to access, to find, to discover, whatever one of those words, in life's buffet, we can, fill our plates with that.
Right. I love how you put all that, because it is a much different perspective looking back than looking forward. That looking back is like, there are things that are much funnier now than when I was going through them, and looking forward, it's like, you know what? It's not going to be that. Yeah. It's not going to be that big a deal. It's we'll find the humor in it. We can find the humor in it. We can find the learning in it, and we'll just move forward. Now, I want to shift gears just real quick, because I want to make sure we talk a little bit about your new book. Because just like I said, I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing. I've been able to go through some of it, but what I've read has just been freaking hilarious to me. What spurred you to put this together? Your new book.
Well, the new book, If You Lean In, Will Men Just Look Down Your Blouse? It's questions and thoughts for loud, smart women in turbulent times. It's published by St. Martin's Press, and they also did the one previous to this, was called It's Not That I'm Bitter. And many of the pieces in it started out as columns, so they're divided into sections. So you can look at this section that's called I'm Not Needy, I'm Wanty, for example, because women are always apologizing every time we want something. It's like, oh, I don't mean to do that. It's like, stop apologizing. Just say, I want this. It's not that I need, I need you to, like, women's voices go up so high that only bats can hear them, and it's not an effective rhetorical strategy.
Right.
And so that being able to say, look, I'm a human being. This is the stuff that I want in life. This is what makes me happy. This is what I enjoy. Can I have some more of this, please? I'd like a little less of this. No, please don't make sucky teeth, chicky noises at me on the street. It does not make me feel good about how I look. I do not see this as flattering. It's hard to get ahead in the world if you're always looking over your shoulder. There's a lot of stuff that is advice. For the young women that I work with, stuff that there are essays of about what I do feel that I've learned, what I wish I could go back and say to my younger self. There are essays about, there are some serious ones about the end of my father's life. I wanted to write about what it was like to have and to deal with a parent who, again, had a great sense of humor, my father, and but he died. He had cancer, epilepsy, and Parkinson's, which he referred to as the trifecta. But even to the end of his life, and this is a guy who had been on a B-24 Liberator bomber in World War II as a waist gunner and a radio man, flew 36 missions, and had not had an easy time in his life. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. What humor they had in their life, they made themselves. What times we had with stuff that they created. And, but even at the end of his life, even sort of miserable illnesses. I remember at one point he broke his elbow. He lived in New York trying to open a window, and because he was pretty frail. And so we had to take him into the hospital. We were waiting for the ambulance, my brother and I. And so the ambulance comes, and in New York City, they have to ask you what hospital do you want to go to. So this nice EMT, this young woman, was there with my father loading him in. We're there, and she goes, "Okay, Mr. Barecca, where do you want to go?" And he looks at her and says, "There's a club on 92nd Street I think you'd like." My father is like sexually harassing the EMT. He's 84. He's got the trifecta. They're loading him in with a broken arm. He's trying to pick this broad up, and she's laughing, and he's in incredible pain. I know what kind of pain. And still, the first thing out of it is when she says, "Where do you want to go?" is a club on 92nd Street. And I'm thinking, there are worse ways to go. And that's the last thing, you're going to say within 2 weeks of your demise. So that was always there. So there were essays about him. There are essays about going to the shrine, having panic attacks, because when I was younger, I used to have these sort of panic attacks, about how I learned to control them, about inviting humor into your life, 19 rules about things you have to do every day. So I put these together in a way that I felt like most people don't sit down and read a book all the way through. I can, that's the luxury of my job, but people usually read. They keep a book, next to their bedside. They read it in the car while they're waiting to pick their kids up from school. They read it while they're traveling. They read it, for 15 minutes they're having a cup of coffee. And so these pieces are short enough that you could do that, but you could skip around. It's a book I hope that people will read and nod and go, "Oh yeah, that happened to me. I know that was, that there'll be something that people recognize." That's the great honor for me, is when people say, "I get that."
Well, when I was reading it, reading the sections, I was like, "Oh yeah, that sounds just like my family." I completely identified with a lot of stuff that you were putting in there, that you were writing about. So I completely agree with that. So if one person out there, you reached me. I'm sure you've reached thousands of other people, but since we're talking, I'll say that you hit me as well. So that was it's good stuff. Yeah, absolutely. It's like anything that we put out there, we're hoping that somebody reads it and somebody gives us some kind of validation. When I write something and somebody says that they read it, I'm like, I'm just happy they read it. Thank you for reading what I wrote.
Right.
I don't care if you like it or not. I'm just happy that you took the time. Thank you very much.
Right.
We'll have to have you on first.
The column that I just wrote exactly about this. I talked about when people write back and they're angry, and I'm just like so excited to get a response from somebody. It's like, oh, thank you so much for taking the time to read. I'm sorry that you think I shouldn't be allowed to roam the earth, but I'm so grateful that I appeared in your local paper. It's great. No, it's been great talking to you, Chip. It's always fun. We always have a good time, and we laugh at each other, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we'll have to, do a second segment where we can talk about, because I'm really, we didn't talk about it now, and we're coming up on time, but I really want to talk about if we can have a second segment where we talk about the difference between, male and female senses of humor. Because I think that there is a much different, perspective on what we find funny and what we don't find funny. Like, I will freely admit that my humor is very sophomoric, and I do find poop and anything dealing with, with the anus hilarious. However, my wife does not. So I would. That's absolutely right. Yes, we could do a whole segment on that. Half of which your audience will not. Half of your audience will listen to, and the other four will listen to. Well, that's absolutely fine. It does work that way, though. Yeah. Yes, I'd be delighted to come back on and have another conversation. When we do that one, we'll let you do most of the talking then, because I don't want to get myself in trouble. So, if after today,
you can make noises.
If after today people want to find you, where do they go?
They can come to GinaBarreca.com, and that's GinaBarreca.com. And they can find me on Facebook and on Instagram and a little bit on Twitter. And they, their books are in the bookstores, they're in Amazon, but your local independent bookstore is really where you want to go. And I write back, as you already know. I write back if you write to me. So I'm not elusive. I am easy to find.
Well, I appreciate you spending time with me today. I've really had a lot of fun. I've enjoyed talking to you, and I can't wait to read the rest of your book. And hopefully we can talk a little bit about that later.
Okay, sounds good. We'll make a date.
We'll make a date. Well, thanks again, Gina. And for those of you listening, make sure you check out Gina's website and buy the book. If you lean in, will men just look down your blouse? All right. Thanks, Gina.
Thank you.
This is Laughbox, the podcast for laughter and humor professionals. Laughbox is made possible by a grant from the National Speakers Foundation and is brought to you by AATH, the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. Find out more at aath.org. Be sure to review Laughbox on iTunes. For show notes and more information about today's conversation, visit laughbox.aath.org.